The hangar hummed with the familiar metallic echo that always made her pulse quicken. But today the sound felt heavier, almost judgmental. Maya Ruiz stood beside the Apache rotor mast. Hands behind her back, boots aligned perfectly, waiting for the verdict that everyone except her already seemed to know. The flight panel had denied her request for combat readiness. Certification again, no explanation, no technical deficiency cited, just a cold signature at the bottom of the form. Around her, conversations paused mid-sentence, eyes drifting away as if kindness itself were forbidden currency. She could feel the unspoken labels hanging in the air. Too quiet. Too unconnected, too unwilling to play the internal games everyone else played. She swallowed the knot tightening her throat. She had worked harder than anyone. Extra simulator hours, spotless maintenance checks, top technical evaluations. But the base had a way of protecting its own circles. And she had never been part of those circles. Not when she arrived, not now. And after the last evaluation cycle, she understood the unspoken message. Her name wasn't supposed to reach the Apache roster. Not yet, maybe never. Still, she held the posture of discipline, refusing to let the disappointment stain her expression. A faceless soldier among many, but one who carried something deeper, something she never spoke about. The promise she made 5 years ago, standing beside a hospital bed, holding the trembling hand of someone who believed she would someday fly the machine she loved. That promise was inked into her skin, a small mark barely visible beneath her collar. She never intended for anyone on the base to notice it. As she waited for Colonel Hargrove's arrival, she heard 2 captains murmuring near the toolbox. Their voices carried easily. She's not on the list. Political choice? Besides, she's too reserved. Command wants someone who blends in, so they'll pass her over again? Already did. Their smirk said more than their words. She didn't flinch. Silence was her armor. But inside, something tightened. Not anger, just the familiar ache of knowing that doing everything right still might not be enough. When the colonel finally entered, the officers straightened instantly. His gaze swept the hangar, mapping every expression, every stance, the way only someone seasoned in reading battlefields could do. He moved without hurry, inspecting the helicopter with a quiet reverence. When he stopped in front of Maya, she felt the weight of his presence settle like gravity. He looked her up and down, not with dismissal, but with assessment. "Specialist Ruiz," he said. "You requested flight clearance review." "Yes, sir." He studied her face, unreadable. "Panel says no." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Yes, sir." "You disagree." She held her breath for a heartbeat. "I believe my records support the request, sir." "No excuse, no plea, just truth." He circled her slowly, his gaze moving over her uniform. She kept still, unaware he had noticed the slight curve of ink peeking where her collar shifted, a symbol of a feather crossed with a set of coordinates, a design small enough to hide, meaningful enough never to expose. No one here knew its story, but the colonel stopped. "That ink on your neck," he said quietly. "Where'd you get it?" The hangar felt suddenly colder. She hesitated, not from shame, but from the weight of memory. "Sir, it's personal. I'm asking personally." Her heartbeat fluttered. No one on base had ever asked her anything personal. She took the smallest breath. "It belonged to my brother, sir." The coordinates marked the ridge where his helicopter went down. The feather was his. He believed flight wasn't just skill, but service. He wanted me to fly the Apache because he couldn't anymore. The colonel's eyes shifted. Not pity, recognition. Something tightened in his posture, as if the memory of someone he once knew rose behind her words. "Your brother's name?" he asked. "Lieutenant Andres Ruiz." Silence spread through the hangar, unsettling the officers who had been listening. The colonel knew the name. Everyone did, though they never connected her to him. Andres had been the quiet hero whose final transmission had saved 14 soldiers during a nighttime evacuation. A soldier whose death was buried under classified layers, whispered about but rarely acknowledged. But Hargrove knew the full story, because he had been there. "You're his sister?" he asked, voice lower. "Yes, sir." The colonel stepped back slowly, and the shift in the room was palpable. The officers who had smirked now stared, unsure, suddenly small. The colonel looked at Maya again. But his expression had changed, no longer evaluating her as a candidate, but as someone carrying a legacy quietly, without demanding recognition. And then he did something no one expected. He picked up the denied application form from the table, held it between two fingers, and tore it in half. The ripping sound echoed against the metal walls. Gasps rippled through the hangar. "I don't tolerate internal politics," he said, his voice sharp enough to cut. "This base has forgotten what service looks like. It's not volume. It's not popularity. It's not who you have lunch with. It's the quiet ones who carry the weight." His gaze hardened on the watching officers. "She gets a private evaluation with me, today." For the first time in months, Maya felt the smallest flicker of warmth beneath the heaviness in her chest. But it was not pride, not victory, just relief, and the faint hint of something she had almost stopped believing in, fairness. But she also felt the shift in the room, the brewing resentment. The ones who expected the spot were already exchanging glances. She sensed the politics tightening like wires. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want to prove anyone wrong. She only wanted to fly, quietly, respectfully, the way her brother taught her. As she followed the colonel toward the Apache, she noticed someone intentionally leave a maintenance panel unsecured, small enough to cause trouble if unnoticed, enough to ground her flight, enough to make her look incompetent. A quiet sabotage. Her steps froze, but not for long. She fixed the panel silently, refusing to let the trap succeed. Not because she wanted to expose anyone, but because flying demanded integrity, even when the world around her lacked it. And when she stepped back, she caught the colonel watching her with a ghost of a knowing smile. He had seen her fix the problem. He had also seen who left it undone. But he said nothing. For now. Maya took her place beside the helicopter. Whatever happened next, she would face it the only way she knew how, with quiet strength. The same strength inked into her skin. The air shifted the moment the rotors began turning, each blade slicing through the tension coiled. Inside her since the day she arrived on base. Sitting in the co-pilot seat beside Colonel Hargrove, Maya felt the machine come alive beneath her palms, the vibrations settling into her bones like a long-forgotten rhythm returning home. The colonel's voice crackled through her headset, steady and composed. "Take us up." She didn't hesitate. The Apache lifted in a smooth arc, rising above the base that had tried so hard to keep her grounded. The world beneath shrank, the hangar becoming a small shadow, the officers who doubted her turning into indistinguishable shapes. Up here, politics couldn't reach her. Up here, skill spoke louder than whispers. Hargrove monitored her hands on the controls. She executed every maneuver with precision, banking turns, pitch adjustments, altitude shifts. Not flashy, not reckless, just deliberate mastery shaped by years of quiet practice. The colonel had flown with hundreds of pilots. Few had hands this steady. "You fly a lot like him," he said suddenly. She didn't need to ask who. "He taught me everything before he left, sir." "He talked about you often," Hargrove replied. "Said you had more discipline in your silence than most people had in their entire careers." Her throat tightened. "He was the loud one," she whispered. "Loud in the sky," the colonel corrected. "Quiet where it mattered." For a moment, the cockpit felt warmer, filled with memories she had tried not to carry so visibly. The promise she made, the reason she endured every dismissal and backturn, the reason she never complained, because flight was the last thing she shared with him. When they landed an hour later, a small crowd had already gathered. Word spread quickly on base, and resentment mixed with curiosity in the air. The officers who felt entitled to the roster spot stood stiffly at the back, faces unreadable but clearly unsettled. The colonel stepped out first. Maya followed, expression composed, boots meeting the ground with quiet certainty. Hargrove removed his helmet, his gaze sweeping the room before he spoke. "Specialist Ruiz has demonstrated the proficiency, discipline, and integrity required of an Apache pilot. Effective immediately, she's approved for flight status." The announcement settled like a stone, dropped in still water, shock, rippling outward. A few soldiers clapped quietly. Most stayed silent, calculating. But the ones who had doubted her now stared with, disbelief edged in something darker. She felt it immediately, the sting of subtle hostility that grows in quiet corners when someone rises, without permission from those who believed. They controlled the hierarchy, but she didn't shrink. Her brother used to say, "Flight isn't just altitude. It's the courage to rise even when the ground tries to claim you. Later that evening, as she walked toward the barracks, she noticed someone waiting by the steps, Sergeant Hale, one of the officers who sabotaged the maintenance panel. He looked uneasy, shifting his weight. "Didn't expect you to catch that panel today," he muttered. She didn't answer. He wasn't owed one. He let out a short breath. "Look, it wasn't personal. Some of us thought Hargrove was giving you something you didn't earn." "I never asked for favors," she said calmly. "That's the problem." She blinked. "How?" "You don't play the game. Around here, people protect each other by staying in the right conversations. You stay alone. Makes you unpredictable." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Hale eventually walked away, leaving her standing in the twilight haze, uncertain whether he had come to justify his actions or to warn her of more to come. But as she turned toward the barracks, she found the colonel waiting near the walkway. He had the look of someone who had witnessed the exchange. He stepped forward, voice low and firm. "You handled that better than most officers I've known." "I didn't do anything, sir." "That's why," he said. "You don't fight for ego, only purpose. People respect that even when they pretend not to." She looked down at the faint outline of the tattoo beneath her collar. "Sir, if they push back harder?" "They will," he said without hesitation. "Because quiet strength unsettles people who rely on noise to be seen. But you keep carrying yourself the way you do? That's how real leaders rise." The words lingered long after he walked away. In the weeks that followed, Maya trained relentlessly. And with each hour, she noticed subtle shifts around, her small gestures of respect slipping. Through cracks in the hostility, a mechanic began prepping her aircraft without being asked. A young private asked her advice on flight applications. A captain who once ignored her now nodded in passing. They weren't acknowledgments of her brother. They were acknowledgments of her. One night, while reviewing maps in the briefing room, she found a folded note left on her desk. No name, no rank, just a single line written in steady handwriting. "Your brother would be proud." Maya closed her eyes, letting the words settle deep in the place where grief and motivation intertwined. She didn't need to know who wrote it. Gratitude didn't need a face. Neither did kindness. When the day of her first official mission arrived, she stood beside the Apache, helmet under her arm, posture steady. The base watched, not with doubt this time, but something quieter, almost reverent. Hargrove approached her one last time. "Fly well." She nodded. "For him?" "No," he corrected softly. "For you." She climbed into the cockpit, the familiar hum greeting her like an old friend. And as the rotors spun and the helicopter lifted, she felt a calm settle through her, an understanding that kindness isn't always loud, justice isn't always swift, and heroes aren't always applauded. Some remain unseen, some remain uncelebrated, some rise quietly and still change everything. And as she soared into the sky, she knew she had become exactly that. A silent hero carrying a legacy not through recognition, but through action, proving that sometimes the kindest stories are written by those who refuse to let bitterness define them, who rise with purpose even when no one believes they should, who inspire without trying, simply by being who they are. She finally flew the Apache. And she did it the quiet way, the way her brother would have wanted,